All right, we're live, so no career-ending statements from here on out. All right, Wiley?
Yeah.
Okay. So anybody who's watching live, you can throw in questions as we go along, and I'll throw those into the conversation as we go. I'm getting ready to start the audio recording for the podcast, and then we'll bring Wiley back in just a moment. So once again, appreciate you being on the program, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
All right. So I'm muting you on live stream, but any statements you make during the introduction will be caught by the audio. So hold outbursts until I cue you in. All right. So let me see if I can start recording. All right, where's the record button? All right, we're recording now. We'll get ready to start the introduction here in a moment. You have found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 184. When we get to the interview portion, we'll be talking to Wiley Young. We are going to mention a few of his books during the course of the interview. A couple that stand out for me are The Perfectly Fine House that he co-wrote with Stephen Kazanewski. I particularly like that story. It is one of the best ghost stories I've read in a long time, and maybe the best or most unique haunted house story I've ever read. Another great one is the Magpie Coffin. That was the first in the splatterpunk westerns that was put out by Death Heads Press, and I've spoken very highly of that series and that book in particular, so I look forward to talking to him about some of those. Before we get into all that, I want to remind everyone the email address for the podcast is mattersoffaith@jwilburn.com. You can use that if you're interested in advertising or if you just have questions you want to discuss on the program. That's mattersoffaith@jwilburn.com. If you're watching live, you can throw in questions as we go along as well. And now we'll get into the rest of the interview. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. My guest today is going to be Wiley Young. Welcome to the program, Mr. Young.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Okay, to start off, can you kind of tell us sort of where your connection to faith or where your journey of faith began for you?
I guess when I was a kid, my grandfather is actually a Nazarene pastor, and so I was raised in the faith, but it took a long time for me to really embrace my faith as my own, and went through several different cycles of what actually I believed in.
How has that changed for you over time then, sort of from the people who introduced you to faith to kind of where you stand now in your beliefs?
So, for growing up, I was raised in a very, evangelical form of worldview for things of that nature, and I really, struggled when seeing things around the world, people in need, people, how can God allow evil, that kind of thing, and especially stuff that happened in my own life. So, I stopped believing there for a long time. Then I went into there is a God, he just doesn't care. Then I finally circled all the way back to believing in after some things happened in me personally that proved, for me anyway, that there was something else. And now I have this kind of foundation of Christian beliefs that might not be as orthodox as others.
What do you think kept you from just switching over to being an atheist or an agnostic instead of coming back, do you think?
Honestly, atheists scared me more than anything else. The whole, the belief that there is nothing that comes after, that, we're all embers of flame that just sort of flare up and then die out just as fast. And I don't know, I think that the whole belief or longing or hope that there is something that comes after kept me from sliding full on into atheism.
Now, obviously, I brought you on the program specifically to talk about it, but how often does your faith come up in just regular life, or as you go through the course of things, either in some way that you bring it up or other people asking you about it?
Yeah, well, sometimes it gets brought up, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not out to shove my beliefs down anybody's throat. If someone wants to talk to me about it, I do, but I'm also fascinated to hear about what they believe and where they came to the conclusions they come to. And so when it comes up in everyday life, I try to live by, what I think that a decent moral human being should live like, especially following the teachings of Jesus. The Old Testament being what it is for the Bible, but I always said that Jesus was spot on in his assessments of things. So that's how I try to live. And sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not out to try to make anybody feel uncomfortable when they're around me.
Where do you think we run into trouble as Christians in trying to apply like the things that Jesus says? Because it seems, if you were to break that down, that it would be pretty straightforward and it would work pretty well to establish a moral life or create a faith that wouldn't be antagonistic towards other people. So where do you think, as a faith body or as a church whole, that we kind of get off track with that so often?
I think people get off track with caring so much about what others do that they fail to realize what they themselves are doing. I found a lot of the whole loving your neighbor really just involves not giving a crap what your neighbor does.
Kind of libertarian Jesus, I guess.
Right. If they ask if they want to know, I'll say my piece, but ultimately it's not up to me to tell someone else how they should live. I'm not the one in charge of the universe, and I don't want to be.
Now, as a part of sort of the horror community and as a writer, how has that faith either intertwined with what you're doing or come into conflict or run parallel or that sort of thing?
It generally runs parallel. As I said, nothing that I write is necessarily what I believe in, especially for some things, for like the Magpie Coffin, for example. And so I don't... how to phrase this, it's fiction. It's not true. This is not a reflection on how I believe that we should treat others or how people should treat, or how I want to treat people or how people should treat others. This is just, it's entertainment. I hope the Lord's a fan. I want to sign a copy for him one day.
Now, I've interviewed a few Christian writers, writers who are Christians, not Christian writers, but occasionally I'll run across folks who have sort of struggled with that or had to come to some sort of maybe justification isn't the right word, but like maybe some sort of minor crisis of identity where they sort of reconciled, their written work with some sort of lifestyle they felt like they should be living generally. Did you go through any iterations of that, or did you kind of work together at the beginning?
No, for me personally, I did not. I thought more along the lines of how are others that I grew up with who are still, who are super, what's the word I'm looking for here? Tuned into their beliefs, where obviously I'm a horror fan, therefore I am obviously worship the devil or something. And how are they going to take this? And ultimately, I decided it wasn't up to me to say how they should take it or how they should not. The only thing that really kind of reflected was that none of my characters are ever going to take the Lord's name in vain, because it was a commandment. I believe in honoring God and loving my neighbor. So I just decided I didn't need to have any of my characters do that, especially when there were so many other fun curse words to no one enjoy.
Have you run into any pushback or awkward conversations or that kind of thing with friends or family from being a writer and being a person of faith as well?
Sometimes it's more along some members of my family, like my grandmother called me and said, "Hey, he's about to read the Magpie Coffin." I was like, I really wish he wouldn't.
It's a good book, though.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. You spoke very highly of it. I appreciate it. So I hope he enjoys it too. But like my own father, he could not get past chapter 13 of it. And actually called me and was like, "You still hold the Lord in your heart, right? Your salvation."
He's checking in on you. Um,
Yeah.
I kind of, we'll talk about the books as we go along, but while we're on the Magpie Coffin, I may go ahead and jump into that a little bit. Like, my dad was a big fan of Westerns, and I actually wrote a Lit Reactor article kind of broadly about this idea of where these sort of new Westerns kind of fit into that tradition and where they sort of expanded a little. But I was kind of curious what my dad would think of it, because he was a little bit of a horror fan, and he was definitely a fan of westerns, and like both of those. Speaking of your book specifically, and I guess that run of books from Death's Head Press more generally, because they got some great horror authors writing those now. I was curious where he would fall in. Was your dad like a fan of westerns more generally, or horror at all, or like how did he kind of compare to my dad? I guess and that crossover of interests.
My my father loves westerns. It's actually a point of contention of my wife. My wife also is a western lover. Her father raised her as well on them, and so we found out growing up that her father raised her on John Wayne westerns, and my father raised me on Clint Eastwood. And so, he was enjoying it up until it slid a little bit further from hardcore revenge story into flat out like Hills Have Eyes type horror type stuff for that book. And so he enjoys it up until that. He's not that much of a horror fan. It's just not for him. But he did also actually start me on my horror journey by letting me watch Universal monster movies when I was a kid. So he likes westerns, and that's why Magpie Coffin's dedicated to him. But he's never gonna go far enough where he could ever read something extreme.
It's interesting because I wondered about my dad because like those interests did cross over, and he's not around anymore. But I'd be curious what he would think of those kind of things. It's kind of a toss up maybe. Okay, was getting into your work now that we're discussing it. Was Catfish in the Cradle your first novel?
Yes.
Okay, and that didn't come out that long ago. What did your writing career kind of look like leading up to Catfish in the Cradle becoming your first publication?
So my writing career leading up to it is actually where like my faith story, I guess, and where I am now kind of intertwined because before that, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and so the first thing I wrote, like really seriously tried to write, was this 200,000 word epic teen horror like thing with 50 different characters, first person, third person, and I was like, I will publish it and make millions. It is art. And it's the worst thing that has ever been put to paper, and God willing, it will never see the light of day. But I didn't realize that at the time. So when it did not get published immediately, I went and started my hand at short stories first. So I wrote two short stories that got published, and then after that, it's like the tap was turned off because for 5 years after that, I didn't receive. I received rejection after rejection after rejection on everything else I put out, and it got pretty harrowing for me mentally and emotionally there for a little bit, and spiritually, where I was like, well, I feel like I'm called to do this, but the roadblocks aren't stopping. So I kept writing until eventually, about what year was that? It was 2017. The tail end of that is when I met my writing like hero that I looked up to growing up. Still do. Brian Keene. I'm sure everyone has heard of him at some point. And so he became a friend, and he started giving me advice and how to go about doing things like this. And then it was another year after that, and he recommended me I got more short stories published in between there. The success kind of started picking up again, and from there, he recommended me to a publisher who then asked if I had anything ready, and I had Catfish ready, so I sent that to them, and they took it, and the rest is history.
Now, with Brian King, kind of comes a circle of writers that kind of live in that same area, including like I sort of consider like Summer Cannon and Wesley Southard and some of those sort of in that same group of up and coming writers. You guys live pretty close together, or
No,
are you further? Are you out from them?
I'm the furthest
Okay.
out of my circle of friends. There, I'm down here in the Oklahoma, Texas area, and they're all up in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay, I had you misplaced then.
But
Um,
despite the difference of distance, I don't ever feel like I'm on the outlier. I always feel included by them, and it feels nice when that like when Wes or Summer will call, or Kosnowski, or anybody else up there, and just to check on it, and I'll do the same in return. So it's nice.
Now you guys are kind of on fire with your work right now. Kazanowski's been working for a while. I know Wesley Southard has been publishing for a good while when you include short stories, but sort of recently, sort of all your stars are kind of rising at the same time. Is that something that you've been aware of, or have you just kind of been head down and taking care of your own work?
I've been aware of it. I think that it was a couple years ago. Kaz threw me a bachelor party right before I got married. We were talking about it, how we're all in the trenches, basically. Fighting to get noticed, get our work out there, and so it's one of those things when you see others having success, their success is your success as well, because it not only are they your friends, it reflects on you. People are like, well, that he hangs out with this guy. What is he right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so on and so forth. And so it's not a competition as much as it is just we're all charging out of the trench at the same time, and it's not nice because it doesn't feel like anybody is getting left behind.
Yeah, I've now I'm friends with you guys, but I'm on, kind of on the outside. So I came into your group later on, just with us doing conventions and stuff. So in many ways, I'm sort of reading your work before and around you guys being friends and stuff. So speaking as sort of a semi outsider, like I've highly recommended books from that whole little circle of friends, kind of separately from each other, and recent releases from all of you. So it's something I've observed in terms of just some amazing stuff coming out. And counting A Perfectly Fine House and The Magpie Coffin, are those the three novels you have out, or am I missing one?
Yep, nope. Those are the three I have out. With more on the way, including For a Few Souls More, which is the Magpie Coffin sequel, and a novella which is coming along with that, which doesn't have anything to do with the Magpie Coffin. It's a straight up horror novella that I've had on the back end for a while. But once the ink is dry, we can talk more about that.
All right, that's an amazing set of three first books. Now, I all three of them have made like recommendation lists of mine that I do each month, and like looking at Catfish and the Cradle, it's a really good book, and it's an especially good first book. But then you come out with a Perfectly Fine House and a Magpie Coffin in kind of short order, and so I was already you were already on my radar with Catfish and the Cradle, but then those two books came out, and I'm like, oh, there's something more going on here. Um, Now, focusing in on A Perfectly Fine House, I spoke highly of it in the introduction. The world building in that story is incredible. Like it's just you've invented this new world where the entire rules of sort of metaphysics operates completely different than here, and then you built it in a way where that operation's almost as common as the plumbing in a house. But it's that level of detail to where it's so like the world existed before and after the novel, and it's so ingrained that it's almost innocuous, which is a pretty impressive achievement. It's especially impressive the fact that you got two authors creating that. How did you guys go about getting that level of detail, and also not losing the story in the process of describing the world?
So credit where credit's due. The majority of the world building was cause he had laid down the groundwork for a lot of it before I came on board. What he was having trouble with was finding out why a house that isn't haunted is scary. And so we sat down and talked about it for a little bit, and I said, okay, well, what if it's not just the house? What if it just starts at the house and spreads? So then, I came up with how this nihilistic apocalypse that just it sucks the wonder from the world and makes it ordinary to us, and how just an apocalypse that only affects one group of people, what does that look like? And so some other things came up with was we were thinking about religions. I was like, well, Christianity wouldn't be such a big deal in this world, which is why we said that they were a kind of a minor cult, because they're like, this guy came back from the dead, and everybody's like, yeah, well, so did everybody else.
Right.
And I pointed out that cemeteries, like that, what was that going to look like? And we decided that for ghosts, cemeteries are like a vanity project, or just a high-end, real estate for, like, just a monument to yourself more than someplace people will go to remember you at. And so we sat down and came up with an outline, how things worked, when they worked, and the characters, and how we wanted to go about that. And that's how that process went.
Did you have an idea that you were creating something special when it was in process, or is it kind of a thing that you didn't really know how it was going to come out?
I thought it was special. I can't speak for cause. But I was like, okay, this kind of concept, the reverse haunted house story, hasn't been done before. That on itself alone makes it unique.
Yeah, like I said, the difficulty with the haunted house story in general, and I guess ghost stories more broadly, is that I guess it's the same thing with any trope. It's been done a good bit, but then also, like, you run into the trouble of, like, you put any random group of people in a haunted house. It's like, well, why didn't they just leave? Or why, the reader gets to see the warning signs. Why don't the characters react to the warning signs? And you guys found a way to just kind of eliminate that whole dynamic by, like, haunting the world. And then the strangeness was the opposite, and so as I was reading it, I got to get an advanced copy because I think I pestered you about it or something. But it was, as I was reading it, I was so caught up. It was almost like a point where I, like, forgot what the story was about. So you're moving through this world and following these characters. I'm like, oh yeah, there's this bad stuff they introduced at the beginning, and now it's coming back around and that kind of thing. But it was, I could tell going through as a reader that it was unique. That, like, oh, someone's finally come up with a way to do a haunted house story that's unlike. Everybody says, oh, this is a completely new concept on whatever trope it is, and it's usually not. But I don't even think if you guys made that claim. It just was. It was the completely different concept. Was something that's been done before. What was the reception to that novel like? Did it get the praise I think it deserves?
It's gotten hit and miss. As I told Cause, we were rolling the dice on it, because when it boils down to it, it's not actually about the house.
Right.
As so well knew, as like, people are either going to feel really cheated by that, or think it's great. And it's fallen along those lines. People who expected some, actual, like, ghost story where it's, the ghosts are popping out or whatever's popping out in your face, when the horror of this is existential, right. Really, when it deals with death, like final death, and this and the nothing that comes with it. And so I said, people are either gonna like that, or they're gonna hate that it's not a traditional, here's the monster and it has an axe and run away. Instead, they're the run away too. It's everywhere.
I loved it. Now, looking at the Magpie Coffin, which we've mentioned already, I guess to start off, like, that series has gotten big and has gotten some pretty top-notch authors coming into the later ones. Yours was the first one to come out, right?
Right.
How did you get that dubious honor? Like, how did you end up kicking this whole series off?
I just think Jared Patrick rolled the dice and said, "Here, let's use this patsy." He's obviously the worst.
No,
Let's get.
it's a great novel.
But I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to write. Salem was one of my favorite characters I've ever come up with.
Oh, you got the sensibility really good in the sense that, like, your Splatterpunk has sort of this, like, I guess, bombastic, like, in your face style, and you captured all that. But then you also got sort of the best of the nostalgia of westerns. Like this gunslinger kind of hyper realistic world that I guess is the only way a western can connect with splatterpunk in that way. But you did really well. Was this a story you were going to write anyway, or was it the advent of this series that sort of made that idea come together for you?
No, it was never on the horizon at all until Jared and Patrick at Death's Head Press reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're going to put up this splatter western series, just a western that's ultra super violent, and we want you to write one for us." And so that's where the story kind of coalesced from there. There was never any intention before that of doing it. I thought I would do a western someday, but it was going to be a more of a memorial piece to the western tropes and western sensibilities, which has actually gotten repurposed to be the last story that Salem's going to be in eventually.
I think you capture a little bit of that too. Like, there's that sensibility. Like, reading it, I could tell that you had respect for that genre by itself. That there wasn't, you weren't sending it up. You were respecting it. So I think that feel comes through in that first novel, even though obviously there's that splatter element that is all through it, which I think elevates it. I think it makes it really great. Now you've done a lot of what I guess I would call like Southern writing. That sensibilities in there and the settings and the characters and that sort of thing. Were they seeing any of that in your short story writing that made them think that you would be a good kickoff for that series?
I think so. The story I did in the Clickers Forever anthology was set in the same place that Catfish and the Cradle is, and actually has a minor connection. And then we did the what was it? The And Hell Followed. Did that story for that, and had
Yeah.
that one was in took place in South Carolina, and I don't know. I grew up in East Texas, so it's right what you know.
Right. Now the South is a pretty diverse region. So like when you're discussing the marshes of South Carolina versus East Texas or things like that. Like a lot of people think, well, I'm from the South, and so they kind of have this idea of, okay, my experience is the South, when in fact, like New Orleans couldn't be more different from the hills of Tennessee, and two different spots in Texas are almost like two different worlds sometimes. How much of that do you explore out in? Are you kind of like, well, I know how much you do because I've read your work, but was there ever a sensibility that, okay, like I'm just going to stick with what I know, or did you make that effort to kind of go out and sort of capture those other elements that are Southern but different from your experience?
That's actually got the phase of my career that I'm at right now, because I wrote Magpie Coffin and Catfish, which both had very, I don't know, Southern sensibilities, but I don't know how you describe Salem for that, since he's from Kansas. I don't know if that's the mix, but I decided that for the next stories that I wrote, I wanted them to have a distinctly un-Southern flair, so I couldn't, so that I wouldn't get typecast as the oh look, there goes Joe Lansdale Jr. I could be.
Right.
But so the ones I have planned right now, there's only one that takes place in this. It's a vaguely Southern setting, but you don't know where it is, what time period it's in. It could literally take place anywhere. It's kind of has a more of a fantasy South feel to it.
Right.
And then the other one that I'm writing starts in Oklahoma and goes west from there.
Now, I know you're not going to talk about the contracts that you're signing and that kind of thing, but more in a general sense, sort of, I guess, jumping off from the three novels you have out now, like what does your production schedule look like in the future? Are you kind of poised for a novel or novella a year, or are you getting to two a year, or like what does the next few months and years look like so far?
I I want to hit two a year every year, and luckily next year is looking even better than that, where it'll probably be three.
Oh, that's
But
excellent.
three, well, the third one is the Clickers collaboration with Kosniewski, Stephen Kosniewski. So the it's looking like two a year plus a collaboration of some sort. But I've ever since Corona started, my writing kind of like tapered off. I don't know what it was, maybe just the state of the world or just anything else, or Magpie Coffin's release, but it tapered off, kind of hit a plateau for a minute. But recently, over the past month, the bug has finally hit me again. I've been writing nonstop, so I'm hoping that I can eventually get out to where I want to put out like four a year, honestly.
How has the coronavirus affected you in terms of? I guess you've described mood a little bit, but like with work and with career and like having conventions pulled up and all that sort of things. Generally speaking, how has that landscape played out for you?
Personally and socially, it has sucked because I haven't got to see any of my friends that live distantly. I haven't got to interact with any other writers because where I live, I always make the joke that the Oklahoma Horror Writers Association chapter has a 100% membership at each meeting because it's just me. But so I don't really get to interact with any other writers out here, so it's kind of lonely sometimes. But at the same time, we're about to sell this house, move somewhere else, and that requires money to fix up a house before you sell it. So it's been nice to not have to use money for the conventions to do those kind of things. And with Perfectly Fine House and Magpie Coffin releasing this year, that's been great. I told him, I said, I feel like this year has been the greatest for my career, but it has sucked in every other regard.
Well, at least you got the career stuff going. That's always nice. And like I said, and as you know, I'm a big fan of what you're putting out and think you're on a great roll. Before we close off, where can people sort of find your work? What's the best place to find your books?
All of them are on Amazon. None of them are out of print, so that'd be the best place to find them. The other thing you can do is I have a blog called Adventures in Absurdity where I ruminate on life and other things and post funny memes that I find or create.
All right, excellent. Thank you for being on. So far, the experiment of recording live and then doing the audio recording has worked out well. So I appreciate you being my guinea pig on that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, and we'll talk to everybody. I'll talk to everybody next week.